I still remember the exact second my phone buzzed, the small vibration slicing through the warm stillness of my kitchen, like a scalpel through skin, interrupting what was supposed to be a quiet, comforting evening. A simple Thursday filled with vanilla candles, soft jazz, and the sweet scent of peach cobbler rising gently from the oven. The kind Julian always said reminded him of summers in Savannah, though he'd never actually taken me there like he promised. I had just pulled down the oven door, a warm breeze of cinnamon and sugar kissing my face as I leaned in, checking the golden crust with the edge of a fork, smiling to myself at how perfectly it was turning out. I wiped my hands on the faded green apron he'd bought me last Christmas, the one embroidered with Betrayal's bakehouse in cursive pink thread, and I grabbed my phone from the counter, expecting a message about traffic or a last-minute meeting that would make him late again, as usual. But what I saw was something else entirely. Not a delay, not an apology, not a compliment on the dessert I had texted him about earlier. No, what greeted me on the screen were words so brutal, so cold, they didn't even seem real at first. Just 4 sentences that felt like a knife twisted into my spine. I'm done. Don't call me. I filed for divorce. It's over. Jay. That was it. No greeting, no explanation, no punctuation beyond that abrupt period after my entire life. I blinked, squinting as if my vision had blurred or the screen had glitched. Or maybe, just maybe, it was some cruel joke, a prank from a hacker, or a mistake from a coworker with a twisted sense of humor. But it was from his number, the number I had memorized, like a prayer. The contact name still read, Julian Hart, as if mocking me now. I read the message again and again. My stomach lurched with each pass, like I was falling endlessly through a bottomless elevator shaft. My mind, unable to process how 4 years of love, laughter, sacrifice, and struggle could be reduced to 14 words, dropped into my life like a bomb, without even the courtesy of a face-to-face detonation. My knees gave out, crashing hard against the tiled floor, the fork clattering beside me, and I let my back slide down the cabinet until I was sitting there, numb, surrounded by the glow of the oven and the scent of a dessert that now made me want to vomit. My hands trembled as I dialed him. Once, twice, 3 times, all straight to voicemail, each ring echoing louder in my ears, like an alarm I couldn't shut off. I texted, "Is this real?" No answer. "Why are you doing this?" Silence. "We can talk about it. Please." Nothing. I stared at our wedding photo hanging above the dining table, the one where he was kissing my temple and I was laughing, eyes closed, full of trust. That girl in the photo didn't exist anymore. I tried to steady my breathing, but panic clutched at my throat like a fist. Something told me to check our bank account, just to be sure he hadn't just stormed off in anger. My fingers flew over the banking app. Password, Face ID, loading. And then, nothing. 0. A big, fat 0. Not a cent in checking, nothing in savings. My paycheck, which had hit just 3 days ago, gone. Every penny, erased. My access locked out, unauthorized, as if I was the stranger. My jaw dropped. I checked again and again. I refreshed the screen like it would magically fix itself. But no, he had taken everything, drained the account dry like a vulture picking apart a carcass. I checked the joint credit cards, maxed out or canceled. I called the bank, heart pounding. "I'm sorry, ma'am. You're not listed as the primary on these accounts anymore." But I was yesterday. How? My name was on everything. My income had kept us afloat for years. I'd paid the rent while he was jobless. I bought the damn coffee table he threw his feet on every night. But now, I was locked out of my own life, like I'd been digitally ghosted from the existence I helped build. My voice cracked as I tried to explain to the rep that this had to be a mistake. She just sighed, sympathetic but firm, like she'd heard it before. "You'll need to speak to a legal representative, ma'am." Legal? That was when it hit me. This wasn't a tantrum. This was a plan, premeditated, precise. He hadn't just left me. He'd destroyed me financially in one surgical move. Like he'd spent weeks plotting how to vanish while leaving me with nothing but unpaid bills, overdraft alerts, and a freaking peach cobbler in the oven. My chest tightened until I could barely breathe. I called his sister, desperately, praying for some insight, some humanity, anything. She answered on the third ring, her voice awkward, hesitant. "Brielle, I don't really know what's going on. Julian said he needed space, that he was stressed, wanted a clean break." Clean break? What did that even mean? Was I a bone he could snap off cleanly and toss aside? "Did he say anything to you?" I choked out. "Did he even mention me?" There was a pause. Not really. He just said he needed to move on. And with that, I knew. He'd been planning this like a heist. Quietly, methodically, waiting until the perfect moment when I wouldn't suspect a thing, when I was baking for him, when I was still foolish enough to love him. I dropped the phone and screamed, not out of rage, but out of sheer betrayal. The kind that scrapes your soul raw. I curled into myself, sobbing uncontrollably, my tears soaking the tile beneath me, while the timer for the cobbler beeped in the background, like a cruel reminder of how much I still cared. I thought of all the nights I stayed up editing his resume, coaching him before interviews, waiting tables while he studied for the bar, skipping vacations so he could focus, believing every lie, trusting every excuse, loving blindly, faithfully, completely. And this was my reward, a message, a financial mugging, a broken home. I cried until my lungs ached, until my lips cracked, until my sobs turned to gasps. I must have stayed on that floor for hours, the cobbler long forgotten, my life reduced to silence, shadows, and shattered illusions. But somewhere between the heartbreak and the rage, something inside me hardened. A cold, sharp clarity took root in the pit of my stomach. I wasn't going to let him walk away with everything. My money, my dignity, my trust, without consequence. If Julian thought he could discard me like a worn-out coat and ride off into a sunlit future, while I curled up in the dark, he had severely underestimated the woman he married, the one who rebuilt him from the ground up, the one who knows all his secrets. I didn't know exactly what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the ignition, and he had no idea who he just set on fire. By the time the sun pierced through the cracked slats of my kitchen blinds the next morning, casting fractured light across the cold tile, where I had unraveled just hours before, the woman who had collapsed sobbing over betrayal was dead. What rose in her place was someone sharpened by grief, calcified by injustice, and forged in the quiet fury of survival. And as I stood barefoot in that same kitchen, my eyes bloodshot and wild, but no longer leaking tears, I knew one thing as sure as I knew my own name. I was going to make Julian regret the day he ever mistook my love for weakness. My name is Brielle Carson, and no one, absolutely no one, steals my life, drains my account, and tries to walk away clean, like I was some disposable chapter in a story he already closed. So I started with the one thing he'd never expect: strategy. If he was going to burn the house down, I was going to sift through the ashes, salvage the weapons he left behind, and build an arsenal. First step, I lawyered up. Not with a discount legal aid or some friend of a friend who owed me a favor. I walked into the glass-walled office of Tasha Willoughby, like I belonged there, a woman dressed in war paint and resolve. And when Tasha, renowned in 3 states for her merciless courtroom flair and a reputation that made seasoned men sweat through $1,000 suits, looked up from her desk and saw the storm behind my eyes, she didn't blink. "He left you broke?" she asked, the corners of her lips twitching into something between sympathy and satisfaction. "That's cute. Let's gut him." That one sentence snapped something inside me straight into place. She got it. She saw me. And more importantly, she was already ready to fight. We sat for hours combing through what little I still had. Email trails, texts, statements, a few folders from an old backup drive. And then came the key. The one detail Julian forgot in his haste to vanish like a coward. He'd never updated his Dropbox permissions after law school, and I still had viewer access to an archive so packed with carelessness and concealed chaos, it made my heart race. The folders were named innocuously: 2017 taxes, expense reports, business strategy. But inside, gold, digital gold. PDF after PDF of shady spreadsheets labeled with vague codes like Consulting Alpha and Special Outreach, complete with transfers to and from shell accounts, one of which I recognized from when he once bragged about creating a strategic LLC for deductible creativity. I could see client names that practically shouted conflict of interest, crossed invoices that didn't align, financial logs that hid expense reports labeled as dinners that never happened, and a few unsettling references to retainer bonuses that weren't matched by any official contracts. I couldn't use any of it illegally. Tasha made that very clear, but I didn't need to. What I needed was direction, leverage, breadcrumbs that pointed toward something bigger. Julian, the golden boy attorney with slick charm and courtroom swagger, had built his empire on a foundation of deceit, and I was the ghost rising from its cracks with a smile and a file folder. I printed out what I could prove was mine: messages, shared emails, voicemails where he thanked me for being the reason I passed the bar and keeping him afloat when things got tight. I found old receipts for his tuition, checks I wrote for textbooks, even a lease agreement I'd co-signed on a 1-bedroom apartment we lived in during his internship. Proof that I hadn't just supported him emotionally, I'd funded his goddamn future. Meanwhile, I started building the timeline. I went through every transaction in our joint account, every debit, every bill he didn't pay, every transfer he thought I wouldn't trace. I documented everything. I color-coded dates, labeled accounts, filed affidavits of financial abuse. Tasha helped me construct the narrative: how a devoted wife supported a struggling student, only to be blindsided and financially eviscerated the moment his career took off. But revenge wasn't only about courtrooms and paperwork. That kind of retribution only scratched the surface. If I was going to rise from this, I had to hit him where it hurt: his ego, his image, his pristine, curated world of suits, social circles, and sleek success. So I did something he never saw coming. I showed up. I started appearing in places he'd never expect me to be. Each entrance calculated like a sniper's breath. First, the wine bar on Pine, and 12th, his favorite haunt after work, where he used to take me on Thursdays when we were too tired to cook. I knew the sommelier. I knew the staff. I walked in wearing black silk, heels that echoed against marble, and a smile that dripped with quiet destruction. His eyes widened when he saw me across the room, glass of Cabernet in hand, surrounded by a group of mutual acquaintances. I didn't walk toward him. I let him sweat. Next, the firm gala invite only, black tie. Photos plastered on legal blogs and society pages. I got in through a friend who owed me from undergrad. Walked in wearing a red gown, so stunning, it made necks snap and conversations pause. I knew he'd be there. I timed my arrival to perfection. I found him holding court near the silent auction table, laughing with his partners, drink in hand, the picture of smug success. I glided up to him with the grace of a woman who had nothing to lose and everything to expose. "Julian," I purred, my voice smooth and lethal. "Tell your junior associates how you divorced me by text. It's such a modern story." The blood drained from his face so quickly, I thought he might faint. He laughed, awkward and brittle. "Brielle, this isn't the time." "Isn't it?" I replied, taking a slow sip from my glass. "I mean, it's the perfect time, right? You love public announcements." His colleagues were watching now, whispering. I turned away before he could respond, leaving him frozen in the middle of a conversation that suddenly wasn't about corporate law anymore. That moment wasn't about vengeance. It was about message. I wasn't hiding. I wasn't humiliated. I was radiant, untouchable, dangerous. I wanted him to feel it every time he heard my name, every time he tried to relax, every time he tried to move on. My presence was psychological warfare. I didn't need to scream or throw drinks or make scenes. I just needed to exist where he didn't want me to, like smoke, like memory, like guilt. I wanted him looking over his shoulder every time he smiled. I wanted his lies to crawl up his spine at night and whisper my name. And as I walked away from that gala, heels clicking against polished floors, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a reckoning. The courtroom was coming. The fallout was brewing. And Julian, he had no idea that the woman he tried to erase had just become the most dangerous thing he'd ever created, because I had taken the broken pieces of our past and forged them into weapons he could never outrun. By the time 2 months had passed since that brutal, soul-crushing text from Julian, his carefully constructed world, the one he thought was built on unshakable success, charm, and a spotless reputation, began to shatter piece by piece, like a dam finally breaking after holding back years of deceit and lies. Every polished facade he had put on for clients, colleagues, friends, and strangers alike started to crack, revealing the corruption, the arrogance, and the betrayals underneath. Watching it unfold, I felt something I hadn't in weeks, a fierce, burning sense of control and justice. With Tasha Willoughby at my side, a legal warrior with a razor-sharp mind and zero tolerance for anyone who tried to trample over her clients, we launched a methodical assault on everything Julian thought he'd hidden so well. Tasha moved with terrifying efficiency, like a hawk circling a wounded animal, and I was her sharp talons, determined to bring him down. We started with the financials, the heart of the empire he'd built on my sacrifice and his lies. The forensic audit request Tasha filed through the courts sent shockwaves through Julian's world. Official legal scrutiny into his finances, documents, and transactions that he couldn't dodge or manipulate away. His little LLC, that shell company he always talked about with a smug grin and dismissive wave, wasn't just a tax dodge. It was a funnel for embezzlement, fraud, and carefully hidden cash flows designed to enrich himself while keeping me in the dark. The IRS, which I never thought I'd see on his trail, suddenly took a keen interest. Their investigators combing through records and bank statements that screamed deception. I could almost hear the tightening of nooses as the noose around Julian's neck grew heavier. Meanwhile, the law firm, which once proudly boasted of Julian's meteoric rise, started to distance itself. Whispers circulated through the marble halls, rumors leaked to reporters, and when Tasha tipped off the firm anonymously about his mounting legal troubles, the response was swift and brutal. Julian was placed on probationary leave, a thinly veiled suspension that said loud and clear he was no longer untouchable. But the financial blow was only part of the damage I was orchestrating. There was another, more personal betrayal lurking in the shadows, one I discovered piece by painful piece. Julian had been unfaithful, carrying on a secret affair with Whitney, a young paralegal at the firm, for over a year. The realization was a fresh stab, but I refused to let it break me. Instead of rage-fueled confrontation, I chose a different path. I sought Whitney out, not as an enemy, but as an ally. I showed her the undeniable proof, the timelines, the receipts, the bank transfers, the photos of Julian in our home, lying to her about being alone in his loft. I let her see the man behind the mask. Her shock quickly morphed into anger, and together we forged a quiet alliance fueled by shared betrayal. Whitney did more than walk away. She took the evidence we compiled and filed a formal HR complaint with the firm, providing the incriminating text logs that exposed Julian's sexual misconduct and blatant policy violations. The impact was devastating. Julian's suspension was extended indefinitely pending a full investigation. His credit cards were frozen by the bank, and the audit of his assets tightened like a vice. His reputation, once pristine and unassailable, began to bleed out in public whispers and scathing online posts. Yet through the chaos and ruin, Julian still had the arrogance to send me a text. "You'll regret this, Brielle." I laughed aloud, a sound of pure defiance, because regret was the last thing on my mind. I had never felt more alive, more in control, more victorious. My therapist called it reclamation, stepping back into my power after being stripped of everything. I called it justice, sweet and deliberate. I wasn't just watching Julian fall apart. I was dictating the tempo, making sure every moment of his downfall stung, that every scar was earned, every whispered conversation among his former friends, every sideways glance, every closed door was a triumph. I recalled the firm gala where I had shown up unexpectedly, radiant and unbroken, sliding beside Julian and reminding everyone in the room of the way he had discarded me with a cold text. His face, usually so composed and arrogant, drained of color and confidence. The shock in his eyes was my trophy, a reminder that I was no longer invisible or powerless. I wasn't just a casualty of his selfishness. I was his reckoning. Yet even as I reveled in his unraveling, I knew this was far from over. Julian was dangerous, and desperation could push anyone to darkness. I stayed vigilant, watching every move, anticipating every desperate strike. But the woman who cried over peach cobbler and betrayal was gone, replaced by Brielle Carson, fierce, determined, and unrelenting. I was a force he could never have predicted, armed not with fists, but with evidence, presence, and the relentless drive to reclaim what was mine. This was about more than Julian. It was about sending a message to everyone who thinks they can destroy someone and walk away unscathed. I was the storm coming for them. And as Julian's empire of lies collapsed beneath him, I stood taller, a survivor not just of heartbreak, but of betrayal, greed, and deceit. My future was no longer defined by his choices, but by my strength to rise from the ashes, and the world was about to see exactly what that strength looked like. The day the knock came felt like the moment my world pivoted once more, though this time the shift was nothing like the shock that shattered me months ago. It was Tuesday, a day that began like any other, with the lingering hum of ordinary life around me. The faint buzz of traffic outside, the subtle scent of rain on pavement, and the soft clink of my teacup on the countertop as I prepared for a quiet morning. But that knock, hesitant yet unyielding, stirred something deep inside me. I hadn't expected to see Julian again, certainly not standing on my doorstep with a look that betrayed the ruin he now wore like a second skin. When I opened the door, the sight of him hit me harder than any courtroom verdict or legal document ever could. Gone were the $1,000 suits that once seemed to cloak him in untouchable power. Instead, he was draped in a wrinkled, faded gray hoodie and jeans that hung loosely, as if they had been discarded carelessly, along with every pretense of dignity. His eyes were bloodshot, not from late nights winning cases, but from exhaustion, regret, and the slow unraveling of a man who had lost everything. His voice was hoarse, fragile, as if the words themselves were a struggle to form. "Brielle, please, can we talk?" he asked, a tremor of vulnerability bleeding through the familiar syllables of my name. The door clicked softly behind me as I stepped aside, letting him in, but inside, I was a fortress, the woman who would never again be caught unaware or broken. I wanted to see the ruins of the man who had tried to erase me, to witness firsthand the wreckage he had become. He lowered himself onto the very couch we had once chosen together, that soft, neutral-toned West Elm couch that now belonged solely to me. The weight of years of memories hung heavily in the room, but I felt only the cold resolve of someone who had rebuilt herself from ashes. He spoke first, his voice barely above a whisper. "They froze everything," he said, eyes cast downward, hands trembling as if the mere act of talking would shatter him completely. "My accounts, my assets. The firm put me on probation, and the bar might suspend me. I made mistakes." I leaned casually against the kitchen counter, my tea cooling slowly in my hands, savoring the bitter warmth as I let his words hang in the air. "Mistakes," I echoed, my voice low, steady, each syllable carrying the weight of every sleepless night I'd endured since he'd left. "You mean like abandoning your wife with a 14-word text? Like draining our joint bank account until it was empty, leaving me without a cent?" His eyes flickered away, unable to hold mine. "I wasn't thinking," he muttered, voice cracking. "I panicked. I thought I'd be happier." "Happier?" I snapped, fury igniting like wildfire in my chest. "You stole my life, my security, and my dignity, and called it happiness? You thought you could erase me, make me invisible, and vanish with everything we built. But you forgot one crucial thing. I'm still here. I'm still standing." His posture collapsed further, the facade of arrogance completely gone. His hands shook as he ran them through his disheveled hair. "Brielle, please. Can we settle this? Privately. I'll give you whatever you want. Just let me make it right." I took a step closer, crouching so our eyes met directly, so he could see the unflinching truth burning in my gaze. "Julian, you don't get to decide what I get. The law will, and the people you hurt will. Karma's already doing its work." His shoulders shook with real, raw sobs, the kind that shook the whole room and stripped away the last shred of the man I once loved. But I felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a cold, unbreakable certainty. This broken man, the one who left me shattered and penniless, was finally paying the price. Yet, even as he wept, I knew my fight was not just about retribution. It was about something bigger, about protecting others who might one day be blindsided the way I was. So, I took the next step, not out of cruelty, but out of duty. I poured my story into a blog post, raw, unfiltered, unrelenting in its honesty. I gave every truth without naming names, turning my pain into a beacon for those who had been silenced or erased. The response was overwhelming. Women from all corners of the country reached out, sharing their own tales of heartbreak, betrayal, and survival. My story became a movement, a rallying cry against invisibility and injustice. The ripples caught the attention of a tenacious journalist who dug deeper, unraveling Julian's network of deceit and fraud. The bar didn't just suspend him, they disbarred him. His firm erased every trace of his existence from their websites and records, as if trying to pretend he never existed. His assets were seized, his credit destroyed, and his name dragged through the mud in headlines that once would have made him untouchable. He had fallen from elite to erased, a ghost haunting the ruins of his own making. And I had become a voice for those left behind, fierce, fearless, unyielding. I was living proof that even when someone tries to erase you, you can rise. You can reclaim your story, your power, and your future. That Tuesday, as Julian wept on my couch, begging for a settlement, I realized this wasn't the end of our story. It was a new beginning. A beginning where I no longer hid in the shadows of betrayal, but stood in the light, shining brighter than ever before. Because sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't revenge at all. It's living well, speaking loud, and refusing to be invisible ever again. And trust me, I was just getting started. The room was thick with tension as I watched Julian's shoulders shake with sorrow. For the first time, the man who had so carelessly discarded me looked utterly defeated. There was no pride left in his eyes, no trace of the man who once walked into courtrooms with his head held high. He was a shell, vulnerable, exposed, begging for mercy from the woman he'd tried to destroy. But mercy wasn't what I owed him. Justice was. Not just the cold justice of laws and courts, but the justice of truth, accountability, and consequence. I saw the years he had stolen from me flash through my mind, the nights I worked overtime so he could study, the lunches I skipped so he could pay tuition, the dreams I buried so he could climb the ladder of success on my back. All for a man who thought it was acceptable to end a marriage with a text and leave me in ruins. I remember the nights I cried alone in the dark, wondering if I was invisible to the world, to the man who swore he loved me. But now I was visible, sharper, stronger, alive in ways I hadn't been before. Julian's apology rang hollow in the silence between us. Brielle, I never meant to hurt you like this. I was lost. I was scared. I thought I could fix it on my own. Lost? I scoffed quietly, bitterness curling in my throat. You lost your integrity. You lost respect. You lost me. My voice was calm, but every word carried a weight that crushed the space between us. He flinched, as if struck. The vulnerability he showed was no longer a weakness I could exploit. It was a warning, a signal of the consequences finally catching up with him. Can you understand what it feels like to have everything ripped away without a word? To watch your life unravel because someone else decided you were disposable? Julian's eyes glistened, the torment inside him now fully exposed. I never thought it would come to this. I folded my arms, eyes steady, unyielding. Well, it did, and you'll live with that every day. Then I stood, crossing the room to pour myself another cup of tea. The ritual calmed me as I weighed my next move. Julian stayed seated, staring at the floor, broken in a way no courtroom judgment could ever have achieved. I wasn't interested in his pleas for a private settlement or promises of restitution that would never truly repair the damage done. I wanted the world to know, not to shame, but to protect. Because Julian's story was not unique. There were countless others, women, men, families, who had been blindsided by people they trusted, invisible victims left to pick up the pieces in silence. So, with a fierce determination, I took out my laptop and began to write. Each word a weapon, each sentence a shield. I poured my pain, my betrayal, and my lessons into a blog post titled simply, "When He Leaves You With Nothing But a Text." I did not name Julian, but every truth was there. The heartbreak, the theft, the cold abandonment. I shared the timeline, the evidence, the emotional devastation, and I ended with a message of resilience and hope, that no one deserved to be erased, and that reclaiming your voice was the first step toward healing. The post went viral within hours. Messages flooded in. Stories from women who recognized their own pain in my words, from strangers who thanked me for speaking the truth, from survivors who found strength in my courage. The community that formed was fierce and unbreakable, a collective roar against invisibility and injustice. And then came the journalist, sharp, relentless, and fearless. She took my story further, digging into public records, unearthing the trails Julian thought he'd buried deep. Her exposé revealed the extent of his fraud, the network of lies, and the victims who had been silenced too long. The Bar Association had no choice but to act decisively. Julian's suspension turned into disbarment. The firm cut ties completely, and his name was scrubbed from every professional platform as if he had never existed. His financial empire crumbled, assets frozen, accounts seized, credit destroyed, leaving him with nothing but the hollow echo of his own downfall. I watched it all unfold, not with glee, but with a solemn recognition that justice had finally been served. The man who once held all the power was now powerless, exposed, and erased. And me, I was no longer just a victim. I was a voice, a beacon for those who had been left behind. I spoke at events, shared my story on podcasts, and worked with organizations to raise awareness about emotional and financial abuse. My experience became a call to action, a reminder that no one should be invisible in the face of betrayal. That Tuesday, when Julian sat on my couch, begging for a chance to make things right, marked a turning point, not just for him, but for me. For the first time, I was free. Free from the chains of silence, free from the shadows of betrayal, free to build a future that was mine alone. The scars remain, but they are proof of survival, proof of strength, proof that even when someone tries to erase you, you can rise. You can reclaim your life, your dignity, and your power. And that is the most powerful revenge of all. Months slipped past, like chapters closing in a book I never wanted to read again, but couldn't put down. After Julian's world had crumbled to dust and ash beneath the weight of truth, I found myself standing at the edge of a new beginning. One I had to craft with trembling hands, but an unbreakable spirit. I left the city that had witnessed the rise and brutal fall of the man I once loved and once despised, seeking a fresh start where no shadow of betrayal could follow me. Packing up the remnants of a life that was half mine, half his, I moved miles away to a small town that promised anonymity and quiet, something I hadn't known for a long time. The walls of my new apartment were bare at first, but I began to build anew, not just with paint and furniture, but with hope, resilience, and the fierce determination of someone who refused to be a victim. It was in this solitude that an idea struck me, fueled by the voices I'd heard from strangers online. the countless messages pouring in from women who had been through the same nightmare. I realized my story wasn't just my story anymore. It was a movement, a rallying cry for every woman who had been silenced, discarded, and left to pick up the pieces alone. That's how Reclaiming Her Voice was born. A podcast created not for sympathy, but for power, healing, and unyielding solidarity. I poured my heart into the first episode, narrating every detail: the text message that shattered my world, the empty bank account, the courtroom battles, the psychological games, and finally, the sweet victory that came not from revenge alone, but from reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my future. The episode hit like a storm, flooding charts and streaming platforms with listeners hungry for truth and healing. Women called in from every corner of the country, their voices trembling with pain, yet laced with newfound strength. They shared their stories of betrayal, survival, and defiance, creating a tapestry of resilience that wrapped around me like a protective cloak. One call stood out among the rest. A young woman from Ohio, whose voice cracked as she confessed how my story had given her the courage to leave a toxic relationship she feared she could never escape. She told me, "You gave me the strength to leave a man just like yours, and now I'm free." That moment, that connection, lit a fire inside me that no hardship could extinguish. It became clear. My story was never just about revenge. It was about rebirth. Julian's name became a whisper in the background of my life, a cautionary tale for those who dared to abuse trust and power. Last I heard, he was living crammed in a cramped apartment with roommates, scraping by as a freelance editor earning pennies, a far cry from the glossy image he once projected in courtrooms and boardrooms. His LinkedIn profile was a ghost town, void of updates or accolades, his reputation buried beneath the rubble of his own making. But I didn't dwell on his downfall with glee or bitterness. My satisfaction was quiet, steady, rooted in the knowledge that he would never again have the chance to rob another woman of her light, her dignity, her future. Society has always expected women to suffer betrayal in silence, to wipe their tears and carry the burden of heartbreak as an unfortunate fate. But I refused to be that woman. I screamed instead of whispering. I fought instead of folding. I wielded every weapon in my arsenal: truth, law, and an unbreakable community of survivors. And I won. Every step of the way was a battle. Every victory, a hard-earned triumph against a system that often favors silence over justice. The final words I shared on that first podcast episode still echo in the hearts of my listeners, resonating with a fierce and empowering clarity that has become my signature message. If he thinks ending you with a text is the last word, write your own damn ending, and make sure it's louder. This was not just a line. It was a manifesto, a battle cry for every woman who had ever been cast aside, for every person who had ever been told their pain didn't matter. It was a reminder that we are not defined by how others leave us, but by how we rise after they do. I started traveling to speak at women's shelters, legal forums, and empowerment conferences, sharing my story in vivid, raw detail, never shying away from the darkest moments, never sugarcoating the bitter truths. Each time I spoke, I could see eyes light up with recognition, hear breaths catch in shared sorrow and hope. I became a mentor for women navigating their own storms, guiding them through legal battles, emotional turmoil, and the long road to reclaiming self-worth. My podcast grew into a community, a digital refuge where stories of pain transformed into stories of power. I collaborated with legal experts, psychologists, and activists, working to create resources and support systems for those trapped in cycles of emotional and financial abuse. The ripple effect of my journey was more profound than I had ever imagined. But beneath the public triumph was a quiet, private rebuilding of myself. I returned to passions I'd shelved for Julian's sake: painting, hiking, writing poetry. I surrounded myself with friends who lifted me up and saw me for who I was, not who I'd been in relation to a man. Slowly, I rebuilt not just my life, but my identity, free from the shadow of betrayal. One chilly autumn evening, as I walked through the park near my new home, I paused under a canopy of amber leaves and breathed deeply. I thought about how far I'd come, from the woman who curled up on the kitchen floor, devastated and alone, to the woman who stood here, whole and unshakable. The path was jagged, littered with pain and uncertainty, but it had led me to this place of strength and purpose. I knew Julian's name might never be fully erased from the echoes of my past, but it no longer held power over my present or future. My life was mine again, written on my terms, louder than any cruel text message could ever be. The story I once feared would end in heartbreak had transformed into a testament of survival and empowerment. And that is the message I wanted every woman, every person who felt abandoned or invisible, to hear loud and clear. You are not alone. Your pain is valid. Your voice matters. And no matter how you are left, you have the power to rewrite your story and to make it roar